Welcome to today's Coffee with Craig. Very much appreciate you guys tuning in and joining us as we talk about firearms policy, culture, politics, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please remember to like and share these video feeds as well as our podcast feed. Yes, we're available on 9 different platforms. If you want to know which ones, by the way, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. But if you want to know which ones, just follow the link in the description of this video for anchorfm.com. It's anchorfm.com/coffee with Craig. You can find out which podcast platforms we're on. So please make sure, like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as follow us on Facebook so that you can get the alerts whenever we go live. So also want to remind you, and I know we do this every time, but I'm going to continue to do it until I know you guys are doing it. Make sure you guys go to fpcgear.com. fpcgear.com is where you can buy all sorts of cool pro-Second Amendment t-shirts and know that every penny that you spend is going to go right back into the fight for our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. That's fpcgear.com. All right, getting into today's topic. There's still a lot of conversation out there about 3D printing of firearms. And the worst thing about all of this stuff that is out there is just how much inaccurate information is out there. I mean, it is really, really sad the way in which the left is portraying the idea of 3D printing. And so we wanted to at least take a moment today in order to kind of dispel some of those myths and have on with us someone who is into firearm manufacturing and is actually into 3D printing of firearms to help us to dispel some of those myths. And with that, we have with us Drew Walker from Walker Defense Research. Mr. Walker, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So we're hearing, I mean, there's a whole lot of talk out there about 3D printing of firearms, yada, yada, yada. I mean, can you help us dispel, some of these myths that are out there that the anti-gun community is trying to put out there?
Absolutely. Just, tell me where to start. There's a lot of them. And, I'd like to say, first off, as far as 3D printing, I honestly think it's because it's so poorly understood that kind of myths abound, right? It's this kind of magic black box that some people perceive as, you press a button and a gun comes out. It's not quite that simple. And 3D printing itself refers to so many different types of manufacturing methods that, from what we deal with, which is 3D printed metal, or DMLS, stands for direct metal laser sintering, to something as I'd say more approachable for the average person, like FDM, which is essentially like a 3D printed plastic. So because there's so much to talk about under the umbrella of 3D printing, I think people don't do the research and have an opinion before they've done, any bit of fact finding. So I think that's fertile ground for where we are today, especially when you throw politics in this.
It's so funny that you say that. We had a meme that we put out that basically people liken it. They think it's like on Star Trek where they walk up to the replicator, and they say, I'll take a fully semi-automatic assault rifle.
And boil it down to something so simple, but there's so many different kinds of 3D printing that I wish people knew more about it, because I think there's a bright future as it relates to the gun industry, and it's kind of the inevitable too. It's going to be more and more common, and I think my company, with our first product that's publicly available, is proof of that. And we didn't just go to additive or 3D printing just to be novel, but it allowed us to produce our design, and without any sort of compromise or needing to, okay, we can't quite machine that. So it really allowed us to take the gloves off and do everything we wanted to do in the way we wanted to do it. And then while we're at it, we even made it out of a fairly exotic material, to the point that we even brought the cost of an Inconel muzzle device down from that $300 to $400 range down to sub 200. So there's so much people think when it comes to 3D printing, even in the industry or even among people who do, um, 3D printing commonly, there's even things that people don't quite understand. And if you've got one to throw out specifically, I'd love to kind of speak to those points to bust some myths.
All right, so let's just start with the general. People think, like, going back to the most common firearm that people are looking at in terms of, oh, 3D is dangerous. 3D is the Liberator, the one that Cody Wilson designed. Now, there are people out there who, quite frankly, believe that, first of all, this is once again a fully functioning, semi-automatic, very, very dangerous firearm that anyone with a 3D printer can manufacture and use. Let's just start with the fact that, what kind of a 3D printer do you really need to be able to do something like this, ranging from the Liberator all the way up to something more complicated like what you guys do?
So for something like the Liberator, that's kind of a complicated answer, because it all comes down to materials. And you could have a really inexpensive 3D printer you buy off Amazon, and it may not really work that way. It may not be able to hold up to the, whether it's pressures, strength required to, you may be able to print the device, but, material could really make or break that. And people just think that if you've got the file, you've got a printer, it'll make it work. Well, it's not quite so simple. And I think materials within 3D printing really, hold back a lot when it comes to what's generally available to the public. Now, when you look at what we do, a DMLS machine is, I think, a top of the line DMLS machine, it's cheaper to buy a Bugatti. It's accessible to the average Joe. And, at the end of the day, it's incredible technology, but it's quite exotic. Now, think back to like the 1950s, when a computer filled an entire room and no one could afford one of those. And now today, after 2 years, you get a new phone because it's just acting a little slower, quote unquote. What with your 64 gigs of memory and whatnot. So, decades ago, that was unthinkable to have that amount of power just in your hand. So who knows what 3D printed metal will do 50 years from now, in terms of being generally accessible. But as far as the Liberator goes, one thing to keep in mind for everyone who's wondering, if we allow this quote unquote to happen, there's going to be blood in the streets. But I believe Cody Wilson published Liberator files originally years ago.
Right.
Have you heard of one single crime that has occurred that's associated with it? I haven't.
No, and I haven't either. As a matter of fact, there's a video of a guy with 3D printer who actually printed out a Liberator. He was a journalist. A journalist took him to do this, and they actually fired it, and the thing blew up in his face. In fact, here, let me, for our viewers, I'm going to go ahead and show them the video here real quick so that they can see an example of what a potential Liberator might do.
We took Michael to Eagle Gun Range in Farmers Branch.
Welcome to Eagle. How are you?
Good, how are you? Where owner David Prince wanted to see that firearm for himself.
That's awesome. Right.
And agreed to let Michael test fire it. Michael added a 1-inch roofing nail as the firing pin.
It's going in fine.
And then inserted a .380 caliber bullet into the barrel. On the range, we set up several cameras to see what would happen.
Right.
As David Prince
Oh yeah, that's
Right
good.
there. That's good.
put that pistol in a vise and tied a string around the trigger.
Okay, good.
All right, firing pin's in. I need to get everybody's eyes and ears on. Going hot. Wow. Everybody all right?
There it is.
All okay? Everybody clear?
First reaction is wow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Watch it again here in slow motion. The gun blows itself apart. Plastic pistol exploding in every direction.
So as you can see, 3D printing of the Liberator in particular is far from a perfected science for the average John Q. citizen.
I would say, to say the least, there's a lot more that goes into it. beyond just I have a 3D printer and then I can push a button. There are some definite details that are required to make that all work as perceived. And so I think perception has a lot to do with it. It's just a method of manufacture, really, and it's no more threatening than it shouldn't be any more threatening than any other one that's commonly available today. And in fact, if we want to talk about things that work in this kind of perceived way, where if you have a file and a 3D printer and it's that simple, we've had, if anyone knows what CNC stands for, computer numerical control machine, we have traditional, not additive like 3D printing, but subtractive, milling and just lathes, etc., that are all CNC machines. And these have been around for years. So, and that's how a lot of firearms are made, in the industry. So there's just not a threat to the public at all. It's completely perceived out of the way I'd say the gun control crowd understands this is there's this magic box over here that erodes their ability to control you, and they can't deal with that. So when in doubt, they stomp their feet and they have a fit, and they'll throw out the same platitudes as always about how, we want to keep kids safe and stuff like that. But I think proof and concept is, there's never been a crime, associated with the, Liberator, or example of it, being misused. So because they're throwing out all these hypotheticals from a stance of ignorance, they're getting people worked up where they really shouldn't. Like I said, CNC machining has been around for years, but even that's not that simple. There's people who are very skilled in the art of what they do and take years to be, say, a master machinist. And so even a CNC machine, which, has a computer at the core of its operations, even that isn't quite so simple. And I think people need to know that that perception is something that look deeper into it. It's well worth it. But this idea that if we don't stop it, it's just going to destabilize society, and that hasn't been the case, and it won't be the case.
Well, I think the problem is that they get most of their technical understanding of firearms from Hollywood. And that is a major problem, because most of the time in Hollywood, first of all, they're not interested in reality. What they're interested in is sensationalism. And so, yeah, they want to make firearms, any firearm, look as dangerous and as badass as possible, ignoring the actual reality of what is. That's where we get things like this whole idea of, well, we can have smart gun technology where only the person who owns the firearm can fire it. Completely and utterly ignoring the fact that, yeah, anytime you start adding any sort of electronic or computer technology to a firearm, you increase the likelihood of failure of that particular firearm, plus the fact that it can just get hacked. These things like, being able to mark the rounds, micro stamping, all of these things are all things that come out of Hollywood. And even once again, their perception of what firearms are and how they're used and who's using them, it's insane, because you can't when you sit down at a table and you start talking and you know what you're talking about. I mean, your industry. Imagine sitting down with someone who knows nothing about your industry, and they're telling you about your industry, about what you do. You try to educate them and try to give them the facts, and they just, that doesn't fit their agenda, so they just flat out ignore it. All right, so let me ask you this. So one of the other things that people are concerned about, their concerns about 3D printing of firearms, is they're worried about the untraceable factor of the plastic firearms. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think it was in the early 80s, plastic firearms came on the boat over from Austria. We called them Glocks. And
I love my Glock.
as far as plastic firearms, misnomer is used pervasively, throughout the industry. And gotta say, I love my Glocks. And at the end of the day, if you notice at the very bottom, the serial number is actually stamped in a piece of metal embedded in the frame. So it's plastic guns are actually nothing new when you think about it. And so, like you said, it's a sensationalized idea of throwing out, here's what could be. And it's trying to take, imagine this and fit it to some narrative that it's a very thinly veiled agenda. At the end of the day, one thing a point I did want to make to, just viewers out there is this isn't really about 3D printing, right? It's about this magic box that in their mind, is Star Trek level technology that just erodes their level of control over you. And this is about control. This is about, you think about it, when people talk about 3D printing guns, the Liberator, you go on any gun forum, and if there's ever a, feature debate over Glock versus 1911 versus HK or what have you, people get very opinionated about every little feature really fast. So you kind of jump back to the Liberator, and I believe it's a single shot handgun. Not exactly the thing that would fly off the shelves, in the gun store when people are spending, $500 to $1,000 on a handgun at a time, easy. So, people are in this quote unquote debate. People are worked up over something that wouldn't exactly make it on its own when it comes to, a feature-driven handgun at all. And beyond that, it says one specific thing to me. When we have a single-shot handgun that we're talking about that everyone's worked up, it comes down to, the gun control crowd wanting to just not give you access on your terms to firearms. It's all about their terms to any gun. Because what you see kind of absent from this debate is, we're not talking about kind of isms they like to throw out to sound quote unquote reasonable, where they say, oh, you don't need a gun like that. You don't need, a 30-round magazine. You don't need an AR-15. Well, it was never the Bill of Needs. It was the Bill of Rights. And, beyond that, the fact that this kind of plays their entire hand at once. They are having a hissy fit because they don't want to allow you to have access to any gun when it comes down to it. And this magic box in their mind gives you exactly that. So it cuts right to the quick of it and kind of reveals their entire end game, right? We don't like guns. We don't want you to have them. We don't want you to have them easily, and we want to be able to determine what you can and can't have. And this just flies in the face of that. So when you look down to the core of this, 3D printing is only this mechanism that, in their mind, just completely erodes.
Well, exactly. It's, we one of the things that we've been pushing is we've pushed 3D, as we pushed, codisfreespeech.com, our website where you can download those plans. Our whole thing is that this is about civil liberties and individual liberty in particular. And it's about it's about government tyranny being used to take away individual liberty for fear that some might abuse that liberty. Now, we just don't do that. In other countries, they may do that. Here in the United States, we don't do that. We value individual liberty so much so that, if someone abuses their liberty, if they abuse it, like, for example, the example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Yes, you can. But what happens is that if something bad happens, if there is no fire, and something bad happens, we have things in place, laws in place for when someone abuses that liberty to hold them accountable. But what we don't do is put tape over their mouths before they walk into that theater. That's what they want to do here. They want to take away the civil liberties of everybody because they're afraid that a minute number of people might abuse those liberties. And I'll be the first to tell you, civil rights are dangerous. They're dangerous because they are fundamental rights. And yes, there are people who might abuse them. But you don't take away the rights of individuals simply because you fear that some people some people might abuse them. And that's what they want to do for the Second Amendment. And then with that, there are ancillary rights that they're starting to take away. Your right to due process, your private property rights, and in this case, your free speech rights. The ability to be able to, even though you can't, even though, yes, you are not allowed to manufacture an undetectable firearm, the fact that there's information out there, plans out there to be able to manufacture, there's nothing wrong with sharing that information. In particular, the funny part is that with the Liberator, it actually includes, as a part of the plans, a metal plate so that it is not undetectable. But, people kind of forget that whole part.
I mean, you could make any device, no matter how dangerous. At the end of the day, there's always been a law against murder. There's a certain level of, we can't make. School shootings are already illegal. There's just the ridiculousness when it comes down to the fact that in their line of logic that civil and individual liberties are tied at the hip with personal responsibility, and at some point, we're not children. We're adults, and we've fought hard over the centuries to have these liberties. And there's a reason that we're the best country in the world, because we've shown by example the prosperity and just the quality of life that arises when those liberties are protected. So, this, to your point, exactly, this idea that we have to prevent you from doing something bad, before you might even possibly do it, it's very dangerous. And people have to realize that, like I said, this isn't really about 3D printing. This is about this kind of control play that they're kind of going on about.
Well, and the worst part about it is that the only people that are really affected in this whole thing are law-abiding citizens, because criminals are not going to be controlled by their laws. I mean, you want to talk about untraceable guns. Every home build that does not include a serial number is a quote-unquote untraceable gun. Every firearm that is stolen and has the serial number filed off is an untraceable gun. Individuals who are seeking to do harm, they're not worried about whether or not the magazine they're using is more than 10 rounds. They're not worried about whether or not their firearm is a bullet button assault weapon, if it meets California's assault weapons laws, if it has a pistol grip or has a muzzle flash suppressor. They're not worried about any of that stuff. They're going to do harm. And the worst part is the only people who are really affected are people who want to put themselves in a position to defend themselves against those individuals who aren't going to follow the law anyway.
It never have. It's never been part of their MO. To your point, absolutely. And yeah, you've kind of beat me to the next point of I talked about the concern about plastic guns. Well, yeah, you take a Glock or any polymer framed handgun, and if you removed any sort of metal component to make it quote unquote untraceable, you could do all sorts of things. Not to say it's legal, but you can't just anticipate, well, someone's just going to do this. Someone's going to take the serial number off the gun. They absolutely could, and that's not a precondition to we have to smash the ban button and just lose our minds over stuff. It's people really have to think, what are these problems in reality? Are they really problems? And put it this way, I'm pretty sure if you go through an X-ray, if there are bullets in that plastic gun, I'm pretty sure the bullets will show up. And if you don't have those, whatever your plans are, they're probably going to end very quickly if you didn't even think that far ahead. So it's kind of funny where this whole untraceable gun topic comes in, because when you think about it, I believe, should guns be traceable? Probably not. From the sake of, should the government know exactly how many you have and where they are at all times? It's kind of Orwellian when you think about it. So to kind of speak to those terms, I think the people that worry so much about, that's not traceable, usually in their mind think that, having your firearms traceable is a good thing. Whereas, in the world of the Second Amendment, people that support it, including ourselves, really hesitate and realize why that's such a bad idea. It's just, there's a level of, why do you want to know how many I have? Why?
Because clearly tyrannical governments have never confiscated firearms before subjugating their people. That's never happened any time in history. All right, hey, before we go, I'd like you to do me a favor. Tell folks a little bit about Walker Defense Research and about your product, the Nero 556. I think they'd really love to hear about this.
So, as a company, Walker Defense Research is focused purely on firearms innovation. And it has to be design over the horizon, no immediate peer, starting from the ground up as far as design goes. And, as shooters ourselves, we really want to bring, the finest, most exotic weapons accessories, money can buy to the shooting public. And our first publicly available product was launched earlier this year is the Nero 556 muzzle brake, and it's 3D printed out of Inconel. So I actually have a example of it right here. You can see well on the camera. That's an example of it on the end of a 16-inch mid-length upper.
That is very nice looking.
Thank you. Available in all 50 states, and this is a 3D printed production part. And like I said, I'm not sure how well you can see that. It's designed to... Sorry, let me just put that down real quick. It's designed to balance the muzzle as completely and as perfectly as possible. So designed for absolutely no muzzle rise, managed concussion, and recoil mitigation. So check out our videos. I think you'll like what you see, and thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Now, what's the price range on that?
So the Nero 556s are $179.
Oh, wow! And they're reasonable. I love hearing that.
And it's great to talk about when it comes to 3D printing. Is we actually use 3D printing to drop the price of something made of this material. And real quick, for those that don't know, Inconel is very at home in the aerospace industry, and suppressor guys are going to know Inconel. But it is a metal that's it's a nickel chromium super alloy that's used a lot in rocket engines, jet engines, and it's used for extreme environments. So absolutely perfect for a muzzle brake. But in the past, Inconel's been in the $300–400 range for a muzzle device. So we're actually trying to use this technology to bring it down into something more reasonable. There's never been an Inconel device sub 200 like this.
Wow. How do folks find you? Find out more information about the Nero?
Our website is walkerdr.com, and check us out on Instagram at Walker Defense.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so very much. We very much appreciate you coming on, and hope to have you on again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. And that'll be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. Please remember to like and share this particular video. I mean, all of them we want you to do it, but this particular video, just so that you can help dispel some of those myths that are out there relating to 3D printing of firearms, so that at the very least, if we're going to have a conversation, hopefully we can have an informed conversation. And all right, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in and being a part of the fight for our civil rights. Remember, you got to use them or we're going to lose them. You guys, have fun, stay safe, stay free.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.